Okay, so we are now on to Chapter 6, the Observational Methods. So the learning objectives for the chapter are to compare quantitative and qualitative methods of studying behavior, to describe naturalistic observation, and discuss methodological issues such as participation and concealment, to describe systematic observation and discuss methodological issues such as use of equipment, reactivity, reliability, and sampling, to describe the features of a case study, and to describe archival research and the sources of archival data, statistic reports, survey, archives, and written records. So qualitative research focuses on people behaving in natural settings and describing the world in their own words. Quantitative research tends to focus on specific behaviors that can be easily quantified or counted. So again, it tends to focus on specific behaviors that can be easily quantified. It generally uses large samples, and it bases conclusions upon statistical analysis of data. Now, qualitative research, on the other hand, it really focuses on behavior in natural settings, taking a look at how people behave in their regular environment. It collects data about smaller groups, and it typically happens in limited settings. It expresses data in non-numerical terms, such as personal accounts. It may look at, somebody's personal history, and it is basically their lived experience in words. So rather than looking at statistics, although there are some statistics we can run on qualitative research, it typically is expressed in non-numerical terms. And then it bases conclusions on interpretations drawn by the investigators based on the self-report of the participant. So naturalistic observation is a descriptive method in which observations are made in a natural social setting. So in a study using naturalistic observation, the researcher makes observations of individuals in their natural environment, so in the field. And this research approach has roots in anthropology and the study of animal behavior, and is currently widely used in the social sciences to study many phenomena in all types of social and organizational settings. So the example, Sylvia Schreiber in 1997 used naturalistic observations in her research on practical thinking. And so she would get a group of individuals, she would take a look at, how they behave in their natural habitat, and then draw conclusions based on what she sees. So the goal of naturalistic observation is to provide a complete and accurate picture of what occurred in the setting, rather than to test hypotheses formed prior to the study. And really, to achieve this goal, the researcher must keep detailed field notes. That is, to write or dictate on a regular basis, at least once a day, everything that has happened. And so observers may interview key informants. They may talk to people about their lives and examine documents produced in that setting. And again, audio or video recordings may be used in order to take a look at after the fact. And the final report should support the analysis by using multiple confirmations, multiple people saying kind of similar things. The data in naturalistic observation is primarily qualitative rather than quantitative. And so the descriptions, what we find, are often richer and closer to the phenomenon being studied than our statistical representations. And as you can imagine, just looking at maybe a correlation, it gives a number that something, as one goes up, one goes down, or, when we see one thing, we expect to see another. But, what qualitative research can do is give you context, to give words that help you understand much better than just numbers how somebody lives, or how we can then interpret the environment that we are researching. So quantitative data can be reported and interpreted along with qualitative data gathered from interviews and direct observations as well. Okay, so because participant observation allows the researcher to observe the settings from the inside, he or she may not be able to experience events in the same way as natural participants. And so the decision of whether to conceal one's purpose or presence depends on both ethical concerns and the nature of the particular group and setting being studied. So sometimes a participant observer is non-concealed to certain members of the group who give the researcher permission to be part of the group as a concealed observer. And obviously we want to take the ethics of doing that, but sometimes participant observation can yield data that's not available to non-participant observers. And the researcher then may lose objectivity. But, observers must decide to what degree they will conceal their presence or purpose, which again raises ethical issues that would be taking a look at when we would do, an application to a research ethics board to take a look at, how much information am I going to give the group of people that I am observing for research, in order for them to be able to consent to the research. But we can see how if we told them everything that we were looking for, it might actually change the participants' behavior and then alter the findings. So there are clearly limits of naturalistic observation. The approach is most useful when investigating complex social settings, both to understand the setting and to develop theories based on the observation. And it's less useful for studying well-defined hypotheses under precisely specific or specified conditions. Okay. Field research can also be very time-consuming, and it requires detailed analysis, much longer analysis than, let's say, using a program like SPSS to crunch the numbers and then give us some output, which we can then interpret. So systematic observation. Systematic observation refers to careful observation of one or more specific behaviors in a particular setting. And this research approach is much less global than naturalistic research. Okay, so those observations are quantifiable. We can measure them. And often the researcher has developed prior hypotheses about these behaviors that they're looking for, and they're testing those things in their observations in that particular setting. It can be both naturalistic or sometimes in a laboratory setting. And then observations are recorded using a coding system that's agreed upon. And, when we have coders that are looking at behavior, we want to make sure that we have agreement between, which would give inter-rater reliability so that both individuals are coding the exact same way. So when we look at coding systems, we look at those, numerous behaviors that can be studied using systematic observation. Again, the researcher has to decide which behaviors are of interest and then choose the setting that the behaviors are then going to be observed and develop a coding system. And so they need to decide what behaviors are of interest, choose a setting which the behaviors can be observed, and then define that set of rules that are going to categorize those observations systematically and consistently when they're doing their observations. Okay, so, when we look at systematic observation, there are some methodological issues that, researchers have to figure out. Equipment must be selected, paper and pencil, the types of video and audio recordings. Okay, so, when it comes to equipment, it is becoming more common to use video and audio recording equipment to make such observations because they provide a permanent record of the behavior observed that can then be coded later. Reactivity is the possibility that the presence of the observer sometimes will affect people's behavior, just having a researcher in the room. And sometimes that can be reduced by concealed observation and other methods. So that is the possibility of the presence of the observer, again, affects the people's behavior. But reactivity can be reduced by that concealed observation by not having the observer be right there. And that helps with audio video recording that can be then analyzed later. And so to help ensure a high degree of reliability, Typically, 2 or more raters are usually used to code behavior and are trained in order to make sure that there's what we call inter-rater reliability. We learned that previously, to make sure that both individuals are rating the observation the exact same way. And so for many research questions, samples of behavior are taken over an extended period of time. And that is one drawback to this, is that it does take a lot more time, especially when it comes to the analysis, in order to finalize the results of the study. So then we move on to case studies. Again, these are qualitative, typically. And a case study is an observational method that provides very detailed description of an individual, their subjective reality, their experience. And this individual is usually a person, but it also can be a setting such as a business, a school, or a neighborhood. Whereas a psychobiography is a type of case study in which a researcher applies psychological theory to explain the life of an individual, usually an important historical figure. Case studies are valuable in informing us about conditions that are usually rare, unusual, or noteworthy, and they may lead to hypotheses that can be tested with other methods later on. A lot of times we use case studies in forensic psychology when it comes to individual offenders that are rare. There would be a case study on Carla Homolka or Paula Bernardo because, they don't happen that often, but we can learn a lot by understanding their specific life and how they became who they became. So you can see how it would give a lot of rich texture in understanding that specifics. And you can see why a case study would be important here, because those kinds of experiences are do not happen very often. And so we need to take a good in-depth look when we can, and then maybe create some theories or hypotheses that maybe can be applied to future similar cases. So, archival research involves using previously compiled information to answer research questions. In an archival research project, the researcher does not actually collect the original data. It's already there. Instead, they analyze the existing data using statistics that are part of a publicly accessible record. So if you want to think of, let's say we want to look at socioeconomic status in a certain group, we may look at census data and take a look at all the census data for the past 10 years and compile that. So the data has already been collected. It just hasn't been analyzed or refined based on the research question. Okay. And there are 3 types of archival research data. There's statistical records. Okay. There's survey archives, and there are written and mass communication records. And we'll take a look at all of them. So statistical records are collected by many public and private organizations. And the U.S. Census Bureau, or the Canadian Census, maintains the most extensive set of statistical records that are available. But, provincial records and agencies also maintain such records. And you can see how they would be important because they're data that are already collected, but maybe not analyzed, or maybe there's been no inferences drawn upon those things. Okay. Survey archives. Survey archives consist of data from surveys that are stored digitally and available to researchers who wish to analyze them. So when you think of major polling organizations, they typically take surveys. Let's say the Conservatives are looking to hire or to elect a new leader. They may give a survey to all those who have a conservative background, but that hasn't necessarily been analyzed. And so those survey archives might be there. But have not been analyzed yet. Lastly, it's written and mass communication. Written records are documents such as, let's say, diaries or letters that have been preserved by historical societies or ethnographies of other cultures written by anthropologists, and public documents as diverse as speeches by politicians or discussion boards messages left by internet users. And so those things clearly are available. They just haven't been analyzed. Again, the research has been, the data collection has been completed, just hasn't been analyzed yet. And lastly, when we look at content analysis, And really, content analysis is the systematic analysis of existing documents. And like systematic observation, it requires researchers to devise coding systems that raters use to quantify the information. Typically, let's say we would do a case study, and maybe we'll do several of those, or we do a questionnaire where we have certain questions and we allow the participant to then expand and give their reality or subjective experience with those questions. And so you can see how there'd be a long response. And so we would look for coding, and we would code, let's say every single time a participant says A, we would code it, and we would clip out that sentence, and we would do that for all the participants and then combine them all together in order to create categories that we can say are specific to the research that we are conducting. Okay. So archival research has the potential to address questions that cannot be studied through other means, but it also has limitations. Okay, the desired records may be too difficult to obtain. They also might be very lengthy and time consuming, and we can never be sure of the accuracy